Welcome to Recital Hour. My name is Ian Bassett and I'm the coordinator of Recital Hour. And Recital Hour is a course at San Diego Mesa College in which we invite outside performers to come in and perform for our class. This class is also open to the public and we've decided to live stream many of these courses. So, who is Richard Savino? He's a Grammy-nominated artist and former professor of mine from San Francisco Conservatory of Music. He plays multiple ancestors of the guitar, such as the lute, the theorbo, and whatever stringed instrument he can get his hands on, apparently. His approach is contemporary, and he has no problem playing what he wants to play, but his mind is academic. He reaches back into the primary sources of music in a way that all students, and even some of us professors who are very comfortable with the Music 100 model, should be aware of and could learn from. Rich and I took a deep dive into the history of guitar and how various different instrument types, tuning systems, and codifications, period-specific approaches, and buried historical evidence all show how important the plucked string chordophone, that's code for guitar, instrument as a group was in the creation of harmony as we know it today. Richard is a mine of information. You'll see how harmony and the vertical ascents arrives on the guitar earlier than many of its more academic predecessors. He has a long resume, and if you speak to him privately, you'll know that he's part of the who's who club of classical guitar, rubbing elbows with John Williams, Segovia, Eliot Fisk, and I could name more. But don't take my word for it. Let's hear it from the expert on all period instrument things oriented, Richard Savino. Welcome, everyone, and please welcome to our class, Mr. Richard Savino. Richard, who are you?
Oh, I wish I could answer that for you. I've been in the witness protection program for about 40 years now. I don't
Oh,
know.
what a way to lose it.
I'm an all Italian kid from a New York City area. I grew up outside of New York City, born in Brooklyn, and moved to California in 1985 to take a wonderful job at California State University, Sacramento. And when I moved out, I was invited by the San Francisco Conservatory to be part of their guitar faculty, which has just been a blessing in my life. I received all three of my degrees at SUNY Stony Brook, which was at the time, and it's still referred to this way presently, as the Berkeley of the East, a very big, large research institution. But it had a wonderful school of music that was both an academic school and a performing arts school with a big performing arts center. My primary teacher at the time was Jerry Willard, who is a wonderful, wonderful pedagogue. But I studied quite a bit with people like Oscar Ghiglia, a little bit with Eliot Fisk. We're a little too close in age, but he was a great influence on me. And I was very, very lucky to have worked with Andres Segovia on more than one occasion, both privately and in master classes for a couple of summers.
Yeah, and so I met you at San Francisco Conservatory of Music when I was getting my master's degree. And one of my favorite things about working with you was, besides Basso Continuo, where you gave me the hardest test of my life. Do you remember that, by the way?
Yeah, I gave it yesterday.
um,
Or 2 days.
You had a historical guitar literature sequence that you give. And I believe you do the first three. And does David Tenenbaum still do the last one?
Yes, David does the contemporary 20th century course.
Right.
It's the thing that means so much to him. And it's very weird because I grew up playing a lot of contemporary music and rock and roll and fusion jazz kind of styles. And each year I keep going further back and further back and further back in time.
Yeah.
Of weird life. But yes, I teach the Renaissance, Baroque, and classical / romantic sequence.
Yeah, and one thing that you did for me was open my eyes completely to music history. Now, I had been aware of music history through my undergrad studies and all of that, but a lot of that isn't pluck string chordophone focused, right? It's more about opera, leading into symphony, leading into, what we see as like eventually contemporary music and all of that. But seeing what a huge influence guitar was on all of that was just an eye-opener and something I don't think gets covered in education at all. And it was like something that connected me personally to music history. And it made me go from completely not caring about music history to kind of a music history buff. Now, if anyone's been in my classes before, I go on long diatribes about music history. And I want to blame Richard Savino for all of that. And everything you've ever heard me anything you've ever heard me say, I probably got from Rich.
Oh, You flatter me. I don't know, but you have curiosity, and that's what a lot of it comes from. If you're curious, then you kind of say, well, what was happening with our instrument at a particular point in time with other musicians, but also historically with regard to political movements, literature, poetry. The thing that boggles my mind to this day is that during the, let's say, use the example of the Renaissance for a moment, that every person who studies painting, every studio artist, every art historian knows who Michelangelo is. There's, if you didn't, you'd be thrown out of school, or Leonardo da Vinci. Michelangelo had a nickname. He was called Il Divino, the Divine One. And there's another person who is referred to that. It's the only other person I know at the exact same time. And that was Francesco Canova da Milano, who was a lutenist. It's not one of the big vocal music composers. Francesco really invented the art, or cultivated it to the highest point of perfection, of the ricercare in the 16th century. And, that's a very high art compositional genre. And he gets no attention whatsoever in music history classes. And then if you go to England, the most prominent instrument, the most important one, was the lute. And John Dowland also wrote texts to some of the most glorious vocal music, as well as instrumental ensemble music. And music history classes still don't really give him due justice. It's remarkable to me. If you go further along, you mentioned opera. Guitars and lutes and the instrument called the theorbo, which I will show you in a moment, were all absolutely essential to when opera came about and how opera manifest through the 17th and 18th centuries. They were always part of the ensemble and one of the primary accompaniment instruments, the guitar and the theorbo. Then when you get into 19th century, and you finally have the codification of the guitar to the six-string instrument, which I'll show you in a moment, a couple of different ones, early 19th century guitars, we have 6 single strings. Some of the guitarists were like super close friends with some of the most important composers. Most importantly, Mauro Giuliani, who lived in Vienna with Beethoven, Rossini. He played in like a sort of a superstar band at a series of concerts at the Schloss, so the palace in Vienna in the Botanical Gardens. They played these summer festivals, and the band consisted of Giuliani on guitar, Johann Mayseder, one of the great violin virtuosi of the time in Vienna, Johann Merck on cello, Johann Nepomuk Hummel, who was considered to be the heir apparent to Mozart, until kind of Beethoven just shoved him aside. Hummel was a phenomenally gifted pianist and composer. The guitar was an active part of that community, and it's remarkable that people don't know, for instance, the chamber music of Giuliani, which I've recorded about 6 discs of, because I just think it's beautiful. And for those of you who play guitar, I just highly recommend you listen to Opus 19 Trio for violin, cello, guitar, Opus 65 Quintet, Opus 85, a lot of people know that's the big flute and guitar sonata, duo concertante. But the Opus 25 sonata for violin and guitar is remarkable and quite virtuosic, especially for the violin in the first movement. Guitar is kind of playing accompaniment, which is an art in and of itself, until like the second and the third movement, the last move, the guitar just explodes. It's just like black all over the page. So at least it gives you a chance to warm up.
Well, one of the things that we wanted to talk about today was the your kind of transition. You were originally an electric player and a steel player, and then you eventually go back in time. And I think that's a great perspective to take, because many of us guitar players, we don't start like other instruments where we listen to classical music and then become classical musicians. As you can tell by the axes behind me, I was a heavy metal guy, right?
I love the Firebird, man.
Yeah.
No, Flying V. Flying V.
It's okay. I wasn't going to correct you, but you got it. But like you had a similar transition. But going back historically, I think it's so important to think of this as well, because if you were talking about the Renaissance and the Baroque period leading into the classical music era, a lot of them in music history are focused around the greats and the bigger ensembles. And what you were just mentioning about chamber music, that's probably what most people were exposed to more often, was chamber music, not necessarily the large scale productions all over the place. So please tell us a little bit about how you got into what you do, coming from a not classical background.
Well, one of the things was I loved playing in a band. I loved the social dynamic. I love the idea
Absolutely.
that you do something collaboratively with something. I grew up in a very, very social environment, all Italian, New York City. It's like you have 8 million people over your house all the time. And while I love playing solo, and it's a beautiful, poignant, self-reflective art, it's lonely. On occasion it's lonely, and I just want to, I have only a certain amount of tolerance for my multiple personality disorder. It's like I want to be able to bounce things off of other people. So when I started playing classical guitar, I worked really hard and I sat in my practice room. I also came to a sort of an epiphany one day where I realized there are only how many solo concert artists out there. How are you? Everybody else, pianists, violinists, they make a living by playing with other musicians. And this was something that grabbed me. And I said, I don't see enough guitarists out there in the classical music genre who are doing what guitarists do, which is play with other musicians. And so I made a concerted effort once I finished my degrees, or as part of my doctoral degree, to absolutely dedicate myself to exploring guitar chamber music that was actually written for the guitar, and then understanding the history of the guitar in the context of being an ensemble instrument before the big classical and romantic, early romantic period, and the publications we see coming out of Paris, Vienna, and Milan, and London at the time. Part of that was, it was fortuitous in that when I started exploring Baroque music, because you can't tell now, I actually had a very good voice when I was younger. I've thrashed it because, I scream and yell a lot. And also, I probably had COVID, but, the very early stages of it. And that I coughed for like 3 months straight. And it completely wrecked my vocal cords. Being my age, it wasn't like I was going to have a career singing. So it didn't matter that much, but I miss singing. I won a vocal competition when I was young. And I initially went to school as a vocal composition major because I loved to sing. And I always sang in Bach cantatas and things of that sort. Coming back to playing the guitar, when I got involved with the chamber music aspect of it, I said, what was the role of the guitar during the Baroque period? Because all I kept hearing was the harpsichord and lute. And then I realized it had such a big role in France, Italy, and Spain, the Romance language countries, which makes a lot of sense. And I wanted to understand the solo playing, and we'll look at some scores and hear some of my recordings, and I'll play a couple of notes here live. But I wanted to understand, how did you fit into an ensemble there? And the wonderful, joyous moment occurred when I realized, oh, you can basically just make up your part to this. You can just basically vamp. You can put in licks here and there. You can do this or that you're not restricted by the score. You have to conform to the stylistic paradigm, model. But, you can't be throwing a big blues lick or a fusion Phrygian scale into the middle of something that's in, major that you would do in a jazz fusion kind of thing. But you conform to the vernacular of the piece. And you can noodle around with it, which I love running amok. So it's like being in a band where you have a bass player, the cellist or the viola da gambist. You got your keyboard synthesizer player on harpsichord. You got your singers and your backup singers. I often have percussionists. I got my Ringo, my drummer, and I basically get to direct it and noodle around because my part isn't written out. I make it up.
So that's one of the reasons why I also wanted to bring you in here today. We have a very robust jazz program at our college, and there seems to be a divide in a lot of people's minds between jazz and classical. And with what you were just talking about, whether it's continuo playing, realizing figure bass, or any of that, a lot of the same principles. Now, you did say conforming to the vernacular of the time, but a lot of it is very similar to what a jazz player might do.
Oh, without question. I mean, you're not playing kind of wild improvisational solos over giant steps by John Coltrane. But what you are doing is you're playing standards. And you'll hear a couple of them. a little later on, audience. I just want to make sure we're not just talking about this.
Right.
You will hear them.
You will hear them.
But for instance, when I talk to people, in fact, people who know jazz harmony really well, I go, so play me a C minor 7 chord. Yeah, okay, good. So show me a C minor 7 / E flat. Where are you going to play that? And they all know the easiest way to play it immediately is first position, where you play the E flat on the 4th string, the B flat on the 3rd, the C on the 2nd, and the G on the E string. Root position, it's this. And if you're going to do it / E flat, there, with the E flat on the 1st fret of the 4th string. Now, when I talk to them in the vernacular or the style of music that I do, I just see a C. I look at the key signature and I see a 7, and I go, okay, if there's 2 flats and there's a 7 and the bass note is C, it's a C minor 7 chord. If I see with an E in the bass, key signature has 2 flats, and it says 6/5, I know it's a C minor 7 chord, first inversion, which is the same as seeing C minor 7 with an E flat in the bass. And if I say C minor 7 flat 5, I know to do it this way over here, where I flat the 5th. That's one way to do it. Or over here, you can do the same thing. E flat, B flat, C, G flat. That kind of thing. And same as saying C minor 7 flat 5 if you have a 6 with a 5 below it and the 5 has a flat next to it. So, they tend to mean a lot of the same things.
Yeah.
They just have a different system of notation and communication.
So you heard it here first, everyone. Classical music and jazz, same thing.
Identical. And lifestyle, too.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So the guitar, what is it we love about it and why? How do we get into this? Now, I think we have to start way, way back in time. And I think you have a few things prepared for us.
A long time ago when no one was alive. Well, first of all, actually, I just wrote an article, Why the Guitar? And it's because, it's undying popularity. It's total how people are just into it. Everybody's got a guitar in their house somewhere. Just about everybody. It's like a South Park cartoon. And if you know where I'm going with that, just keep going with it. Other than that, I'm not going to explain it to you. It would be inappropriate. And it's not worth it for me to explain it to you. But the guitar, number one, is portable. It's harmonic. And those two elements combined, the portability and the harmonic aspect to it, are the essential backbone to its popularity. Most people play the guitar to accompany themselves singing or accompany somebody else singing. That's its historical role. Initially, the guitar was a very, very, very small instrument. And I have 2 examples of them here. They both have broken strings on them because I haven't played them for a while, and I do need to replace them. I didn't have time before this, but I'll show you. And you can see it's small, very small. And you can see, even though I have a broken string on the 1st string, so I won't even play this one, it should have there's a double chorus on the 4th string. There's a double chorus on the 4th, a double on the 2nd, I should say, 4-3-2, and on the 1st string it would be single. This is a larger one. This one's great for my hands, but it's still very high pitched. I'm going to show you even a smaller one now. This one also has a broken string, but at least it has 4 of them. You can see there are 4 sets of strings. The one where the 4th string should be is one of them broke. But see how tiny this thing is? It's really tiny to even hold. But listen to its tuning.
Reentrant.
Now, not just reentrant, that's not an E.
Yeah.
It depends upon if I'm tuning to 415, 440, 460. But in our world, it's A, E, C, G.
Yeah.
What tuning is that? It's the ukulele.
Yeah.
This is the guitar of the 16th century. It is essentially an ukulele. It was brought by Portuguese and Spanish mariners across the Pacific, and it was embraced. It's out of tune. I'm not going to keep going with that. I have too many instruments to show you. Yeah. But this is the guitar of the years 1500 through 1600. At the latter decade of the 1500s, right before we get to the year 1600, there are experimentations going on with instruments, and in particular because how important the year 1600 is. We'll get to that in a second. So this is the guitar of the 16th century. Portuguese mariners bring it over. But I want to now go back to the other instruments of the 16th century. The lute reigns supreme. And the lute is an instrument of counterpoint. One of the big differences between lute and guitar instruments is that to go from a major chord to a minor chord on a guitar instrument, you only raise one finger. To go from a major chord to a dominant seventh, you only put down one finger. And I'll show you that with guitars that are attuned in 1 second. What I have here is the equivalent of what one could call the Spanish lute, but it's not a lute. Why is it not a lute? Because it does not have a round back like those instruments on my wall. This instrument is tuned like a lute, like a classic 16th century lute. 6 sets of strings. They're mostly double. The first one is single. That's traditional. It has a flat back, though, and it was called the vihuela in 16th century Spain. Vihuela is the same word as viola in Italian, and what it means is stringed instrument. If we were going to be more specific, we would say it's the vihuela de mano, or of the hand, as opposed to the vihuela or viola de arco, of the bow, or the vihuela or the viola da gamba, that you fit between your legs and would play with a bow. But it just means stringed instrument. But they couldn't call it a lute because the lute with the round back is a descendant of the Arabic oud. And it's a literal translation. Al-oud in English is the lute. It's a literal translation. But it's tuned just like a lute. It's played just like a lute. It's strung just like a lute. But it's not a lute. And if you hear it, I hope it's in tune. It's been sitting here waiting for us. So now I'll play, and I'll back off because I know it's going to overdrive. And you play it just like a lute. And it has very much a lute sound. So this is the vihuela. This was the instrument of choice in 16th century Spain and southern Italy. Most people don't know that southern Italy was ruled by Spain for about 400 years. So Spanish influences were very, very strong. My family name is, my father's family's name is a Spanish name. Savino would have been pronounced Sabino in southern Italy at the time. My mother's last name is Venezia, so that's, Venice is what that means. So at the turn of the 17th century, 1600, we have this fascinating thing occur. Historically, it's incredibly important to recognize what an impact the Protestant Reformation had on Europe, because prior to that, Europe was Catholic, Holy Roman Apostolic Church. When Martin Luther hammers his theses up on his door, Martin Luther was a Catholic priest or friar. Everything starts to change. And one of the basic principles of Protestantism is the fact that you don't have icons nearly as often, and you get away from the symbolic aspect, representational aspect of God, that it's the written word and purely a spiritual connection to the individual. Whereas in Catholicism, there's a conduit through the priest and then the Pope. And yes, it was taken advantage of, and there was lots of problems with corruption. The sale of indulgences, meaning, you paid to have some of your sins removed from your soul so you wouldn't go to hell for too long. You might go to purgatory, a little stop in between, and then you could go to heaven. So, all of those things are kind of crazy. And the idea of relics, I have a knuckle from Saint Sebastian, and look, there's a piece of arrow because he was flayed with arrows, while being fried on a, barbecue. But I have that knuckle. I don't know. How do you know it's his knuckle? Because they didn't have DNA tests. But, that was an abuse because people were receiving money for those things, then they can use that money to absolve themselves of sin. The difficulty is this. The printing press is invented in the, mid-1400s. Literacy is on the increase. The Gutenberg Bible is published. When we finally get to the period of time where Martin Luther does this, his whole thing is the written word. But most people were still illiterate and could not read. So the moral stories and the parables were always present in religious texts could be displayed through paintings. And paintings were very valuable because of that. You had many settings of saints and what the spiritual messages of that you knew because you understood the story and you could see the story before you. But if all that's being communicated to you is with the written word and you can't read, how are you supposed to redeem your soul? So it's a conflict. I'm not saying I subscribe to any of this, but then it has a real impact on music and on the arts in general. Painting in Italy explodes because of this. Because the year 1600 is the year of the first, what we call Jubilee in Catholic culture, following the Reformation. Every 100 years is a Jubilee. Every 1,000 years is a big Jubilee. And so the year 1600, Rome is getting ready for all of these pilgrims to come and celebrate the 100th anniversary, or the 1600th anniversary since Christ passed. And the Pope, the cardinals, the powers that be, because it is a political entity, said, we're going to make Rome the Las Vegas of Europe. The Caesar's Palace, forget that. This is the real Caesar's Palace. And it happens with music, art, drama, literature. In music, instruments are invented, and they're being invented and experimented with in order to exploit this new thing. And the two instruments that come about that are really important to that are the Kittarone, or honkin' big guitar is the literal translation, and the fact that the Baroque guitar now supersedes the Renaissance guitar. And the lute is still popular, but it's going to diminish in its popularity. The reason being is that the guitar invents harmony. Musical notation, musical theory changes radically at this time. Instead of it being something that's linear exclusively, and harmony is the consequence of interweaving parts, it's instead like being in a punk band and playing power chords. Harmony exists in this domain almost exclusively. And I want to show you a couple of examples of how that came about. So this is the guitar that comes about at the turn of the 16th century. Now, this is an 17th century. This is not an exact instrument from that. This is more of a French guitar from the latter part, from the 1680s, let's say. But nevertheless, what's different about this from the 16th century guitar, obviously its size. It has a longer string length the way a modern guitar does. It has 5 sets of strings instead of 4. So it's a lower pitched instrument. So what we have here, depending upon what year and what country, are 5 sets of strings. E, B, G, and now it depends if you're in Spain, Italy, or France. You have 2 strings for the 4th and 5th. There's no 6th string yet. So the D could either be 2 low Ds, 2 low As. In England and France, it was 2 high Ds, 2 high A's. So we go. And so you'd have no low D, no low A. Fully re-entrant tuning. The most common way of tuning, though, in Italy and Spain was to have one of each. So you have E, B, G, D, and then you have A's. And by having both, you have the advantage of being able to play one, and I'll play that just with my thumb, or the low. So if I pluck up with an index or middle finger, I just get the low pitch. If I pluck down just with the thumb, I get just the high pitch. With my thumb, I can get both. With my index finger, I can get both. It just depends upon how you cultivate your articulation. What it does is give a richness of sound. And when I strum some chords for you, you'll hear that. That I love. It's kind of like having a chorus effect or the effect of a 12-string guitar. But it also lets you do other tricky little things. But first I'll show you like the chorus effect. And it's just much more resonant. And playing rasgatos and strumming patterns is so much fun with this instrument because you hear all the little articulations. Yep. When you play on a 6-string guitar, you hear pop, 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 pop. With this, you hear blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And it gives you... So instead, with each string my finger is covering, I get 2 articulations. So with less overall, without having 6 strings, I'm still getting 10 articulations. And it really has a wonderful sound when doing strummy kinds of things. Now, the other advantage of having the kinds of tuning on this instrument is I can play scale passages like this. Typical descending scale from G, G, F, E, D, C sharp, B, A. Now I can slur that, or I can go pluck it. But I can also do this. And see, my left hand doesn't move at all.
Now, this is what's referred to as a campanella figuration, right?
Exactly, yeah. That kind of thing. And it's really fun to do when you're in the middle of a piece and you hear it. One of the things that the guitar tradition does is also begins to exploit dissonances. Now, remember I said this before about guitar inventing harmony. Once again, major chord, minor chord. Pick up one finger. On the lute, you got to reconfigure all your fingers. Major chord, dominant 7th. You go right there. It's easy. Harmony is easy on the guitar. And the lute had more strings. Therefore, you couldn't strum the lute so much because you're bound to hit a wrong note. Just because you have more strings, especially when you have 14 of them, they get to that stage. One of the things that the guitarists do is start exploiting interesting dissonances. There's a chaconne I play, and I'll show you the screen of it. Actually, I'll do that right now and just play you a small excerpt from this. So this is the kind of thing you got to get used to playing from if you do what I do. I'll zoom in on it a little bit. It's tablature. Now, most guitarists read tablature to a certain extent because they grew up playing rock and roll and jazz, and there are tablature systems and things of that sort. This one's upside down from the normal tablature that most pop guitarists play, which is the top line is the E string.
I'm getting flashbacks from your classes in grad school, Rich.
Oh no, I know you're gonna have a meltdown. So the bottom line here is where you have the highest pitched string, but it's not that hard. You have to look at it like this. It's a mirror image of your fingerboard. So when I'm sitting here looking at this piece of music, you see it's in triple meter. It says 3, and then it's blank under the first quarter note. So that means rest. The second event you see is a 3 on the 5th string and an open first string, a C and an E. And below the open, it says trill. So I would play that, just that. It's a main note trill. I'm not going to get into main note trills, upper auxiliaries, but it's a main note trill. So the way this little measure would sound is this. And it's not hard to do, it's just this. It's a hard piece, but that opening isn't. What I want to show you are some of the funnier parts of this kind of thing. As we go through the piece, you see we have these letters, D and G. Well, D and G do not mean D and G. They are symbols. They mean something else. As we go to the next page, I mean, you see chords that you never see. You see the H chord with a 3 on it. The H chord is a B flat chord, and 3 means you play it in third position, which makes it from B flat to what?
C, right?
So if you look here, you see the N chord with 5. The N chord is this chord, which is A major with a big stretch C sharp, E, A, C, C sharp, A. And it says play it in 5th position, so that means it's a C major chord with a high C. That's a C major chord, but it's the N5 chord, which is crazy.
That is crazy.
Right after that, you see it's how it says H3. The H chord is a B flat chord, and 3 means you play it in 3rd position. Same harmony, C major.
So it's kind of like the cage system on guitar. Like
in a lot of ways, it is that.
Yeah. Okay.
And what I love is the fact, if you see, I've marked this up a little bit. They exploit really interesting sounds on the Baroque guitar, because they, just the same way metal players or punk players throw in wrong notes just because they sound cool. They don't know why they sound cool, but they sound cool. This music does the same. If you look at the bottom here, you have this little passage here that begins at where it says 20. And it says to play the B chord, then the A chord, the D chord, and the A chord. The B chord, and I'll show you the chart in a minute, is C major. The A chord is G major. The D chord is A minor. The A chord is G major. So this means to do this. Just the 1st position. C major, G major, A minor, G major. So I'm going to play this. You pluck in between. Those little lines going down mean to strum. So this sounds like this. That first measure where it says 20. Now, watch what he does going on from here. Same chords, kind of, in the next measure, 21. But you see, at 22, he can't quite do what he wants to do. And what he wants to do is have the bass line go from this. So the second measure, he just puts that 2 on the 5th string. So I'll play these couple of measures in a row. And I'll play the ones that are at the end of the second to last line, 21 and 22 and 23 and 24. I'll play them twice, each one of these. 20 again. I'll do it again now. Where it says 22, couplet 22. It's a great sound. He goes from this, which is a relaxed strumming, to this, which is more intense, where he goes down, pluck, pluck, down, up, down, pluck, 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 down, up, down. That happens right there on those 3 chords. A minor, well, he starts it up on the line above. C major, down, up, down, up, down, pluck, pluck, pluck. I think that sounds great. And whenever I play it, people go, it sounds like a Joni Mitchell song. That kind of, and what's beautiful about it is he goes from this kind of, just cacophony. And you're supposed to improvise a bit with the strum patterns. And he goes from that to all of a sudden, all slurred. And then following the slur, all plucked. It's gorgeous. Then all plucked. And then it has a total arc to it, because it starts very quiet and it gets to this very loud spot, and then it comes back and ends with nothing. The last couple of lines are like this. And so on and so forth. I'm about to record this stuff. Nobody's done it yet. It's beautiful. This is Domenico Pellegrini. And what I dig about this guy is this. I used to have this whole thing where people would say, oh, no, you have to play early instruments without the nails, and you have to be totally pure. And I'm sorry. This man's my hero.
He has nails.
Very long nails.
Yeah.
And he just looks like a rock star. It's like, you're not going to mess with me.
Yeah.
He's great. Anyway, so now I want to kind of segue over to the Theorbo for a second. So at the same time, the Baroque guitar came on the scene, and what's really important to understand is, the Protestant Reformation and all this. There was the politics of it. There was also this renewed interest in the humanities, as we call it, meaning just doing art for the sake of art, not necessarily for total spiritual redemption. And there was a group of people who met, men, I'm sorry, it's a sexist society at the time, but it's not entirely, and I'll point that out, that met in Florence, Italy, at the home of Count Giovanni di Bardi. And they called themselves the Camerata di Bardi. We refer to them today as the Florentine Camerata. And what they wanted to do, and this happens very often, was to look back to Greco-Roman antiquity, because it was a more pagan kind of life, and they celebrated the arts for the arts' sake. And members of this group included Vincenzo Galilei, who was a renowned lutenist and composer and theorist, and he's the father of Galileo Galilei, the great astronomer. That family were all musicians. They were phenomenally talented. Galileo Galilei's brother was a pretty famous lute player, Michelangelo Galilei. So his father and his brother and his daughter played music. The other members of it are Giulio Caccini, who gave birth to a magnificently talented composer by the name of Francesca Caccini. She wrote, she's the first woman to have a published opera in Western music. It's titled La Liberazione di Ruggero dall'Isola Alcina, the liberation of Ruggero from the island of Alcina. It comes from Ariosto's Orlando the Mad, Orlando Furioso. And it's a wonderful collection of tales. It's a lot like the Italian version of Don Quixote, without it being as comical, but it's fanciful. Yeah. So it's a fascinating group of people. Caccini also, the father, the one who was part of the group, he publishes a book in 1600. He understood, writes a collection of music, and publishes it in 1602. He knows what's on the horizon. And he says, I'm going to title this book, Le Nuove Musiche, the new musics. This is new. It's like really a radical departure from imitative counterpoint that had preceded it. And the two instruments that came about as a consequence of this, because harpsichords and organs that existed, were the Baroque guitar, the instrument you could strum chords on, and this honking beast, which is called a Theorbo or a Kittarone. And it has 14 sets of strings, and it has a very long string length, so it's really just a bass instrument, and would very much be like you'd put these two together. And the tuning of these two is somewhat similar. This one can provide harmony and delicate little melodic filigree in the upper registers. This one gives power, a little bit of harmony, but bass. So it's like you have the Funk Brothers together in one. If you don't know the Funk Brothers reference, they were the backup group for most of Motown's recordings. They're great. Now, I'm going to put that one down. You got to be very careful with this one that you don't, first of all, break its neck or break someone else's neck by having it come down on their head if you're in a concert. You have to learn to hold it. You can't hold it like this because then nobody could sit near you. You have to hold it like this in a way where your hands can be free. And you see, somebody once got involved with me and we had a bit of a situation, you know. I wish it was that dramatic. I just happened to have a pen and it leaked onto there. Okay, so this is the theorbo. You have to hold it like this so you don't kill someone, you know, as I mentioned before. Listen to its tuning. Those are the basic fingerboard strings. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There are actually 2 on the fingerboard, but that's the classical alignment. So we have a 4th down. But what happens here?
It's up.
It goes up. The highest pitched string is in the middle. It's like a baritone guitar, you know, that Pat Metheny plays sometimes. It goes A, E, B, G, D, A. So now if you don't think of the first string, you just start on the second. It's E, B, G, D, A. E, B, G, D, A. E, B, G, D, A.
Oh, okay.
They correspond. So if I play a D chord on this instrument, it looks like this. If I play a D chord on this instrument, it's over one string, but it still looks like that. If I play an A minor chord on the guitar, we all know what that looks like. Well, that's an A minor chord. That's a C major chord. So you don't have to rethink the fingerings. That's the blessing of pairing these two together. So you can switch fast. The lute wasn't tuned to these pitches. Same intervallic relationships, but it was down a tone. So instead of it starting on A, it started on G. So what on this instrument is a D major chord is a tone down on a lute. It's a C major chord. What on this instrument is an A minor chord.
G minor.
G minor, exactly. And so, you know, I've done that only a couple of times where I've played all 3 in a concert.
Oof.
And I'm in the middle of it and my brain just goes. I just lose it because I start playing a tone off on 2 instruments and I'm like, you know, you can only expect so much of a human being. You know, it's like you really can only expect so much. Anyway, it's a very cool instrument. I'll play some chords. That's an A minor chord. This is D minor chord. So if I'm going to do this G major, F major, C major with an E in the bass, because now the basses go down diatonically. You see my thumb. G major. I'll show you the notation for this. All of this, the change of music, the establishment and the invention of harmony, the Baroque guitar, which becomes the modern guitar, and the Kittarone or theorbo, is why they changed the names, I don't know. Nobody can figure it out. All happened in 1600. It's what we call the birth of the early modern era. You got harmony, and harmony, I don't care, even in contemporary music, except for radical serial time point composition. Harmony is still a determining factor in music composition.
Absolutely.
You know, it's and even in 12-tone music, our ears are so conditioned to that we dictate certain motions of dissonance and consonance and the resolution of that because of our harmonic training. That being, and all of that happens because of Martin Luther. Not really, but it's an odd kind of synergy that it all did happen at that time.
Snowball effect.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, you could call it that. Yeah. Before I go and show you a couple of examples on the theorbo and Baroque guitar solo and things of that sort, I'm going to just show you some notational things. There are different kinds of notation that we employ. This is what we call Italian notation. It's what I showed you earlier. That's a Vella piece by Alonso Mudara that's quite famous. I love this piece because he says at the beginning of it, he says fantasia in the manner of a harp of the harpist Ludovico. And he says it is hard. He says es difficile. And as he goes on with it, he says here, and this is why going on and looking at original parts is so cool. He says, desde aquí falsas. And from here on to the end, there are false notes. But if you play them right, they're good notes. They are not bad notes. They're false, but they're good, which is very cool. This is a typical Renaissance lute tablature that was printed by Simone Molinaro. Here we get into historical French tablature, which uses letters in the disposition of what pop guitar tab is, meaning the top line is the highest pitched string. The letter A indicates open. The letter B indicates the first fret. C the second fret. D the third fret. The rhythms are all on the top for both systems, and they're sequential. So you have to use your ears to understand what if and this counterpoint, what the counterpoint is, and how to make sure that notes sustain to bring that out. You have to really listen a lot for that, because it's not given to you in the notation.
Which is contrary to what a lot of classical players think of historical music. They think that everything's written on the page and that's where you get it. But the more you dive into it, the more you have to understand the culture, the harmonic idioms of the day, and all of that.
Without question, you have to understand counterpoint too.
Yeah.
And these guys, this is a piece by Giovanni Terzi, which is like a total shredder piece for lute. I'm not playing lute, but he gets into these absurdly fast runs of 64th notes while he's going through these things. He just starts wigging out. It's like Judas Priest.
Good band.
Moving on. Now here, this is all lute music. This piece here is a toccata for the Kittarone or the theorbo, and I marked it up for a student of mine so they could see where they were, how to play it more or less. I'll just play the opening line for you, and then we'll play a recording for you because this isn't going to be in tune. But it says toccata 4, and it tells you a half note at the top there, and it says open 3 1 open. So open 3, third fret, third string, first fret, second string, open first string. So it begins with that chord, and then you see the Roman numeral 10, which means you have to go to the 10th string in the basses. So you go from this to that. And then he does it again, and then we have a sequence of notes in a run. That's to the end of that first line there. And now he does the same melodic figuration. And he now does it up here slowly. And I'm going to mark it while we listen to it so you can kind of see how I have to go through this. I improvised a bit in the opening. You know, it says 3 there, triple meter. Now we go back to common time here. Short and sweet.
Very nice.
They're really cool. There's a lot of great pieces for this instrument. There's another one I want to show you for one quick second, and it's this one because it kind of shows you how the instruments invented harmony. Like, look at this piece here. It says arpeggiata. And you see no linear motion at all. You have one note in the beginning. It's a diamond shape, whole note. And he says, play that chord. And the symbol below means to arpeggiate. So if I were to be literal and not arpeggiate, which is not really literal, but if I were just to read it in sequence, it would be this. Can't do it well. I'm trying to look at the camera and sticks it over here. So I ended that first line. Mm-hmm. So now I'm going to play it the way he says to play it. Now Kapsberger was this Teuton of a lute player. They called him Il Nobile Alemanno, or Tedesco, the noble German. His family was of German Viennese descent. Settled in Venice, and then went on, moved to Rome, and became a superstar. And he had the privilege of not having to be a commercial artist. So he wrote a bunch of avant-garde stuff. He wrote for Jesuit academies, groups of like the Florentine Camerata, but of Jesuit priests that were very educated and into the arts. And they paid for the publications. So he didn't have to worry about publishing music like Weissor did for amateurs who, you know, weren't interested in the avant-garde and weren't interested in playing hard stuff. I'll play it for you as I interpret the symbols to mean, and I'm going to stop. I'm going to show you one other thing at the bottom of this. So... cadence just to the second line. And I know it's a little out of tune, but it'll just take so long. You know, the good joke, right?
Yeah.
Good joke. And if a lutenist lives to be 80, surely 60 years have been spent tuning and the other 20 playing out of tune. Now, here, this is a controversial couple of measures, those two measures. The one's up from the bottom line.
Okay.
Where it says you have the dotted half note. If I were just to play them literally, without the arpeggio, it sounds like this. And then this.
Dissonance in there.
That's almost too avant-garde. But notice, because he tells the player to play always the arpeggio toward the highest note. I'll do it slowly. I'll arpeggiate each of those chords to the highest note. One. So these are 3 beats. I should be counting, so the dotted half note. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1. Do you see the sequence goes? And then... So it makes logical sense, especially when played quickly. Because it produces a leading tone from this.
Almost like a secondary dominant, but like...
That's exactly what it is. It's a secondary. You see the chord has a C natural on the top, the number 3, and a C sharp in the middle, but you arpeggiate it from C to C sharp, and then it goes to D minor.
Mm-hmm.
So you have that chromaticism, and it produces a secondary dominant harmony.
Yeah.
So. So what we have before us now is the first chord chart that ever existed. This is by Juan Carlos Amat, who published his book in Barcelona in 1596. And basically, he just tells you kind of how to play, and he gives you a chord chart. What's interesting about this is that he uses numbers. He starts at the top, you see it says naturale, and it says the 1 chord, the 2 chord, the 3 chord, with all little ends next to them, meaning that they're going to be all major chords. So the first chord, if you look and you remember the bottom line is the highest pitched string, it's that. So the 1 chord is E major. The 2 chord is this, A major. The 3 chord is this, D major. The 4th chord is this, G major. Now if I play just through them, this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Interestingly, it's not just that they're vertical alignments, with the harmony being the not being the consequence of interwoven polyphony. What's interesting about it, it goes from E to A,
5-1.
A to D,
5-1.
D to G,
5-1.
E to C.
Well, it's like we're proving something here, Rich.
Exactly. And that's fascinating to me.
Yes.
Because it shows tonic dominant relationships. He's not codifying it yet, but he's showing it. On the bottom sheet, it says bemol, which means minor. And so the 1 to 2 chord to the 3 chord, that's the same sequence of what we would call E to A to D, D to G, etc. But they're all minor. So if you see the 3B chord, it's a D minor chord. That's the 3rd chord, and that's it.
Okay.
The 4 chord, the 4B chord, the 4th one in, on the 3rd line down, it says 4B, and you notice that it's the 1st fret on the 5th string. There's your B flat. So on and so forth.
Yeah.
This only existed for a short period of time, this system. It was usurped by this system, in which they said, there's too many numbers already, so we're going to use letters. And they begin to go a little further with the harmonic relationships. Still not 100% codification and practice, but close. The plus chord is E minor. The A chord is G major. The B chord is C major. The C chord is D major, which is La Bamba.
Yeah.
And any other 1-4-5 chord progression. That's very cool. The problem with this system is you have to memorize all those letters. I have most of them memorized. I have to look up the X chord every so often, or the Y chord, or the Z chord. I just don't have them all memorized. What they started to do, though, is they knew people wouldn't memorize them. So if you look at the Z chord, 3rd line down, 1st measure, it says 3-5-5-5-3, which is a C major chord, bar chord. It's the same as the I chord over here, or the H chord over here. So they stopped writing Z eventually. They said, nobody's ever going to remember all these letters. Right. And they said, just take the H chord. It's B flat, slide it up 3 frets.
So that goes back to the earlier example where we
exactly
paged. Yeah.
Good note taking on your part there, Ian. Well done. Yeah. So this is from an Italian source by Foscarini, and you see now all of these chord charts being published that are like blues patterns. That's really what they are. This says passacagli sopra tutti le linee. Lettere. I couldn't see it without my reading glasses. So passacaglia above each one of the letters from the prior chart you just saw. So the first one is A, B, C, A, 1, 4, 5, 1. And it tells you, we want you to strum it like this. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1. And I'm giving a very primitive example.
Right.
So you see it begins with down, up. You can see those little dashes there. And it's in triple meter. Well, you see it ends with 1 going down at the end, back on the A chord.
Yeah.
So we know that that's beat 1. So it begins on beat 2. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. That kind of thing. And people just knew these patterns, like the way people know pop tunes today. And eventually we get to this issue of having standard tunes besides the passacaglia pattern, which is like a blues. The Ciccone, everybody, when they think Ciccone, they all think Bach. I mean, Bach is derivative of this, but it's 120 years later, and it's in Germany, and it's been gone through the soup of all of Europe already. The typical Ciccone is just this. 1. That's the Ciccone pattern. And most often it's in G because fiddle players love to play in G. So it's G major, D major, E minor, C major, D major. And the rhythm is very, very predictable and specific. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3.
Now, is that a hemiola pattern, or is that before?
That's a common misconception. It's not hemiola. Hemiola is when something's in 3.
Yeah.
And the harmony, well, I guess this kind of does that, but it's all in 3. Let's say if you have 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1. The hemiola would be where you take 1, 2, 3, 1 and 2 and 3 and 1, 2, 3. You're not feeling the first part of it in a compound duple.
Okay.
It's similar. They're related. This is actually having 2 meters. One is compound duple. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So the pulse is the same.
Right. Okay.
That kind of thing. And it's a set of standard chord changes. I'll play you a little bit of a chaconne that I recorded with my group. You'll have harmonic changes in there. You just change the. Went to C major. Stop it in a moment. And then we repeat that part. And those kind of introductions aren't written in there. I just kind of begin to make stuff up. I say, okay, let's have the castanets come in here. The thing that's important to know is the chaconne or the ciccona and folia are both works of art, are genre, musical harmonic formulas that came from the guitar. That's where we see the very first ones. And they're only harmonic. This comes back to that issue that I like to talk about, how the guitar invented harmony. The chord changes are this: D minor, C major, a flat 7, F, C, D minor, A major, D minor, A major. This improvised history. So this piece says canzonetta per cantare, for voice. Sopra la guitar, above is the guitar, Spanish guitar, meaning the Spanish guitar part. And you look above, you go, what? And you see these tiny little letters. This relates back to the chord chart I showed you earlier. Those are the chord changes. Now, I changed the key because I wanted it higher. I just liked the way it sounded. But it was very short. And I said, how am I going to do something with this that makes it interesting? So I created a ritornello of the first part of the vocal line for strings to play. And so that each successive verse that you can see is printed above, in which the singer becomes more and more intense, we could have a little interlude between each, and the singer can then go kind of crazy ornamenting, and she really takes it out. It's really quite good. It's like a 2-minute song, but it's really fun. Let me play a little bit of this for you.
Chi desidera di saper che cos'è amore, io dirò che non sia se non ardore, che non sia se non dolore, che non sia se non timore, che non sia se non furore. Io dirò che non sia se non ardore. Chi desidera di
Back to the ritornello.
cos'è amore.
And then they improvised a little bit. Now, second verse.
Chi mi domanderà se amore io sento, io dirò che il mio fuoco è tutto spento, che io non provo più tormento, che io non tremo né pavento, che io ne vivo ignor contento.
And the rhythms are totally cool. Try and feel.
Chi mi domanderà se amore io sento.
Third verse.
Chi mi consiglierà avvampare, né celare, né languire, né penare. Io dirò che non può più sospirare, chi mi consigliera Dio ne può amare.
Final verse.
In amor crederà dolce il gioire, io dirò che più dolce amor fuggire, né piegarsi a suo desiri, né tentar sue sdegnetire, né provare il suo partire. Io dirò che più dolce amor fuggire, in amor crederà dolce il gioire.
It's fun stuff to do. You know, once again, it comes back to the whole idea of playing in a band.
Yeah. The singer was going nuts too. That was awesome.
Yeah. Oh no. Yeah. She starts ornamenting like crazy. You know, the only notes she has are the ones here, and it's like then she goes nope, because each successive verse of the song, she's getting more irate that she's so pissed off about love. Just for everybody to see here, the genres that the guitar really, really is important to are in Italy what we call monody, solo songs, opera, madrigals, and instrumental music, toccatas, sonatas, and sinfonias. In Spain, the vocal genres are called tonos humanos and the zarzuela. Tonos humanos is the same as saying monody, meaning that it's a solo voice. And I'm going to play one short example of that for you. With regard to instrumental, you have danza y diferencias is primary, meaning bailes or rustic dances, like a fandango in particular, that then has improvisations upon it or written out, composed, that you see in many of the sources. These are some of the most important Spanish and Latin American composers. Gaspar Sanz, Francisco Guerrero, Rebaez, Santiago de Murcia from Spain for the guitar. For voice, Sebastian Duron, Jose Marin, who was also a guitarist. He was a thug. He was like the Tony Soprano of his time. He was a priest, got kicked out of Madrid, was caught coming back in, was part of an extortion racket, then was implicated in a murder, kicked out again, defrocked. I love the man.
Movie in the making.
And Juan Hidalgo, who was the court composer for the Habsburgs and Philip IV, and he was the uncle of Santiago de Murcia, the great guitarist. The two names of the bottom are going to become much more important. They're New World composers from Guatemala. They were both at the Guatemala City Cathedral. My latest recording, if you look up Guardian, which is the big London paper, they did a big spread on us for this recording with the disc of the month. And it's a lot of music by, in particular, Castellanos. So if you put in London Guardian, El Mundo, Guatemala into a search, you'll come up with it. These are just some examples I did for another lecture about how the guitar could be an accompaniment instrument, either being played like a lute where everything is plucked, or strummed, which is what you saw on the prior page. That's from these are both from Gaspar Sanz. That's a collection of bailes. That's the chart from Santiago de Murcia. That's Santiago de Murcia's puntillado or plucked continuo accompaniment part. This is an example of a baile by Murcia. It's a hakara, which is a lovely dance. You see it begins with the D chord, which is E, or the E chord, which is D minor, with two upstrokes. That's that first measure. So it goes 1, up, up, down, up, down, 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 up, 1. Once you finally get it, it's so cool because it is like playing a lot of rock and roll or pop music, So we'll do that again.
Stems indicating the strum is, wow, that's so guitaristic, but it doesn't work for the rest of music.
No, you can only do it on the guitar. And the important thing to know is when you're strumming up, it doesn't mean to play every note. And you can't be so literal about it. You have to realize they're weak beats. So you go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, down, 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 up, down, down, up, down, down. And it gives that very... Here's a jota that I can play you a recording of. That's very cool. I'll play a little bit of this by Santiago de Murcia. This is a little bit more folky. And the introduction with percussion is all my thing, Down, up, down, down, up. proto flamenco in that that's the rhythm and harmony before any of the playing comes in. We're now on the third line down, and I'll repeat that. End of the third line. Repeat. Oh no. Whoops. Oh, I didn't put the second page in. And then back to the top. So here we have an example of a piece where there's no accompaniment written for you at all, and just bass lines for a cello. And so I decided that I would make one up, and I'll just play an example of it because it's really a wonderful piece of music by Juan Hidalgo.
Ay, que sí, ay, que no, que lo que me duele, y lo siento yo, que soy Pedro Grullo de mi pasión, y pesadilla mi pena, que no reconoce, no, de pluma del sentimiento ligeras de la voz, pues voy amigas del alma, den anchas a mi dolor, que el corazón apretar me retiene que jugó, los ojos que Dios me ha dado, si es que no las amas Dios, que no es per cuento del cielo el mal que le busco yo.
I'll stop that now. Just I wanted you to have a little taste of that.
Absolutely.
Finally, I'll play 2 seconds of this. This is actually just go and listen to Oigan una Jacaria by Rafael Castellanos.
All right.
Put it on Spotify. The name of the disc is Archivo de Guatemala by El Mundo, my group. It's on Spotify. It's on Apple Music. Listen to Oigan. Actually, it's not on that one. That one's on the Kingdoms of Castile. Oigan una Jacaria. It's on all those services.
El Mundo, is that band Grammy nominated?
Yep.
Okay, just wanted to throw that out there for all the students listening.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I've had that lovely honor of walking down the red carpet, standing next to Lady Gaga. Now we get to this thing of the guitar morphing. In the 18th century, the guitar begins to go through a variety of phases. It goes from 5 double courses to, in Spain, 6 double courses, but only for certain players. In Italy, it goes from 5 double strings to 5 single, same thing in France. And then finally, right around the year 1798, 1800, it becomes the 6-string guitar that we know. I'll say one other thing about the lute in a minute, because now the lute is beginning to die off in most of Western Europe. Eastern and Central Europe, though, Vienna, Northern Italy a little bit, the lute carries on. And in fact, one of the great pieces for the lute is the Vivaldi double concerto for lute and viola d'amore that was written for the visit of the Prince Elector of Saxony, Frederick Christian. And it's one of Vivaldi's last manuscripts. It's a wonderful piece of music. I think it's Vivaldi's best concerto for a plucked string instrument, and it's for lute. I did a video of it with a wonderful group in Portland, Oregon, about 30 years ago that I'm so happy I have. It was for a live PBS broadcast. the big names for the guitar, and when everybody talks about classical guitar, the big names anybody always says are Fernando Sor, Dioniso Aguado, Mauro Giuliani. And I'm like, yeah. But when did they publish their music? When was their music circulating? Same time as Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. That's not Mozart, Haydn, and Beethoven. There's an entire generation of guitar composers before that. The problem is they're only being rediscovered now. One of the leaders of this tradition was the Italian guitar cellist Luigi Boccherini, who arranged a whole bunch of his pieces for strings and guitar, or other instruments for guitar and string quartet in the 1790s. He did a symphony with guitar that I've recorded. It's just called Sinfonia a Grande Orchestra con Chitarra, or Guitarra. And Federico Moretti. So I want to just show you a couple of things about Moretti, because he's another Italian, like Boccherini, like Scarlatti, like Farinelli, or Carlo Broschi's his real name, who all migrated to Madrid because of what happened politically in Madrid. The crown was handed off to the Bourbons, who are of French descent. The king of Spain, Philip V, is the grandson of Louis XIV from France. And his first wife passes away, and he marries Isabella Farnese. And she's very Italian, and she brings a whole troupe of Italian musicians in. And Moretti, Boccherini, they all fit right in. They're from, Moretti's from Naples, Boccherini was from Lucca. This is his the cover of his book that he published in Naples in 1592 for 5 single-string guitar while in Naples. And remember, Naples was ruled by Spain at the time. And you can see here, it's only for 5 strings if you look at the top. Quinta corda, quarta corda, terza corda, seconda, and prima. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, going up. And even the diagram shows only 5 strings. But in Spain, they mostly played this kind of guitar, a 6 double course guitar, like a modern 12-string. Now, the thing is, when you see paintings and they all are dominated by a particular thing, it's sort of like, think if somebody in the future came back to the United States right now, walked into a guitar center, what kind of guitar would they see mostly?
Electric guitar.
Yeah, but what's the kind of guitar most art musicians are playing?
A classical modern string,
six string.
Yeah, 6 string.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's not to say that steel string dreadnoughts and electrics aren't art music, but I'm being obnoxious about that, just the classical world.
Yeah.
So you can't use the fact that you see mostly 6 double strings depicted in paintings as the instrument of choice for the art musicians. You can certainly say it was popular, no question. But I'm just showing this as an example. Music was still being written in tablature, but you see now it has 6 strings for the guitar. Finally, we have the first pieces of music for guitar written in standard notation. It's by a Spanish composer who moved to Mexico. And this comes from a Mexican manuscript. His name is Juan Antonio Vargas y Guzman. It's for 6-string guitar and some kind of a bass instrument. I've recorded these. This is on the Archivo de Guatemala CD. They're the earliest known pieces. They're from 1773 for a 6-string guitar. And I did it with a cellist. It's a lovely collection of sonatas. Have a listen to them if you have a chance. Eventually, Moretti, who I showed you before, says, all right, I'm living in Spain. They play the 6 double course guitar. That's what everybody's playing. Okay, I guess I got to suck it up and do a method for them. But he writes on the first page, but I play the guitar of single strings.
Yeah.
He's an art guitarist. He's just letting everybody know. Anyway, I'm going to conclude this little part of it with this. And now I'm going to like to migrate over to just a couple of pieces of music by Johann Caspar Merz with a score, where the guitar goes from there. So as we enter into the 19th century, we see the guitar codified into the instrument that we basically know, love, and play today, the 6 single-string guitars. Ian knows I've beat him over the head with all this stuff.
Happened.
And we have, it happened. And we have a number of different schools that emerge from that. In Italy, the primary maker in Naples his name was Fabbricatore, which just means fabricator, a guy who makes stuff. In Spain, the primary makers originally were from the Cadiz area, and they were Juan Pajes and Joseph Benedid. Eventually, we get to the school of the Sevilla makers, and in particular Antonio de Torres and the modern guitar, but that's around 1850. In London, the maker of choice, or the significance, is Louis Panormo, who is an Italian. Their family they were Italian emigres, initially from Sicily, then up, I believe, through Livorno, and then into London. In France, we have René Lacote and the Mirecourt School of Guitar Builders that really were phenomenal builders. Joseph Pons being another one. And in Vienna, we have Johann Stauffer. And there are a number of others, but those are the big names. I'm going to focus on the Lacote School, the Mirecourt School, and the Stauffer School. So what I have here in my hand is a Mirecourt style guitar from about 1820, 1830. We don't know. It's an anonymous instrument. It has beautiful inlay all over on it. That's hand cut. It originally had a scalloped fingerboard on it. But I just didn't like the way that felt under my fingers. So I had that removed, which is probably not a good idea for a historical guitar, but I saved it. It has a lovely sound. It projects quite well. It's quite warm, but also can punctuate when I want to. I've done about 30, maybe not 30, 25 recordings on this guitar.
Wow.
Of music by Carulli for Naxos, Merz for Harmonia Mundi, Paganini and Giuliani for Harmonia Mundi, and Koch International Classics. A lot of the ones I did for Koch are now available on this thing on Amazon. That's super cheap, and I'm honored to be in the company I am. It's me and Olirio Diaz, and it's called Big Box Guitar. And it's, you can get it for $1 in MP3s, and there's a lot of my Giuliani recordings on there. My concerto recording of the Giuliani concerto is one that I'm really quite proud of, because it's the only one available without cuts and done on period instruments, and it's paired with the Boccherini Sinfonia, which nobody else knows either. So this is what we have in about 1820 to 1830. It's narrow. It has lots of ivory on it, so I can't take it out of the country. They'll arrest me. Interesting construction in which the back is a plywood laminate. It's satin wood on the exterior, but it's a soft wood on the interior. It's spruce. It has only 2 braces. None of the fan bracing that they were doing in Spain, or they eventually would do throughout the continent. And this remained a very popular style of guitar for a very long time. They're still being made today like this, and a very different kind of heel too. You can see it's called an ice cream cone heel.
Yeah.
There's that nice little inlay over there you can see on it.
Yeah.
Nice little detail on there. The other guitar I have here is this one.
Ooh.
And it's not a Fender.
It just says Fender on it?
Yeah. This is a new neck that I had built for this guitar.
Ah.
This is the original neck. It's too narrow for my fingers, and I saved it. This is a remarkable invention. Fender ripped it off. Let's be honest. Fenders have removable necks. They have screws. Fender has that headstock. This is a Johann Stauffer guitar. The label inside with the stamp. The design was invented by Luigi Legnani, who was the person who was the heir apparent to Mauro Giuliani. He's a tenor from Ravenna, Italy. He migrated north once Giuliani left, because Giuliani's on the run from the police. He's having sex with too many women. He's in debt to everybody, fathering children out of wedlock. He's a rock star. and he bolts, back to Italy, back to Naples. Nature abhors a vacuum. Lignani shows up and becomes the dominant virtuoso guitarist. And now I just got this back from the shop, and my I put that on there. But it's a beautiful, beautiful headstock. It's great. The great thing about this is you can take the neck off and travel with it in a small little suitcase if you want. But that's a hassle. It's small enough that it fits everywhere.
Yeah.
But the wonderful thing about that is you can adjust the action on the neck by turning that screw. So if your hands feel strong one day, or you want to practice hard, you raise the action. But you want to play a concert and you're feeling a little hungover, you lower the action.
Yeah.
It's a shorter string length than this one when you compare the two. They really made them quite short for the day. I don't know if you can see.
Yeah.
It's about,
Yeah.
it's about 61 centimeters, 62 max. Its sound is different. That's a very warm sound. This one's a solid maple back, and it's carved, like the way you would do a violin. And it punctuates treble very well. And I just got this back from the shop. I had a little work done. I'll play the same little Julienne. But I love the way it feels. I love the, it's a lovely instrument. This is what was predominantly played in Vienna throughout the 19th century and into the 20th century. When Segovia did one of his first tours into Germany to visit Hermann Hauser the first, and in Munich, and Hauser was only making guitars like this with removable necks, smaller bodies, 2 braces. And Segovia was like, no, you need to make guitars in the modern Spanish way. And that's when Hauser switched over. But you can still find early Hausers made like this. And they're not nearly as expensive as the modern Hausers because of the Segovia thing.
Yeah.
The other story about this guitar that's really important is that one of the main foremans of the Stauffer shop, and Stauffer made instruments for Schubert, and Stauffer invented the arpeggione, which is a bowed guitar. Tuned the guitar, has the removable neck, has metal frets. Stauffer was an interesting dude. One of the foremen for the Stauffer workshop in the 1834 was C.F. Martin. Christian Friedrich Martin, who migrates to New York, sets up shop on Hudson Street. And when he's there, he's only making guitars like this for the first few years, until he sees that he's in this international melting pot with people coming off the boat from every parts of the earth into New York in the 1830s. And he just says, I gotta make guitars in all styles. And we suddenly see instruments coming from Martin's workshop from New York and then from Pennsylvania that are in a variety of interesting styles. International, Spanish guitars, French style guitars, and eventually we see the classic American parlor guitar. Small, gut strung. In the 1850s, due to the consequences of the Civil War, there was a shortage of gut because they were beginning to do, maybe they had morphine on the battlefield for the first time. I'd say they were starting to really do sutures on the battlefield, and what they used for sutures was gut, sheep gut. And so there was a shortage of strings. And in fact, strings have always been super expensive. Today, we live in a totally different environment. Strings are cheap compared to what they were because most of us use synthetic strings made from nylon or carbon fiber. Strings would often cost more than the instrument, especially for lutes. People begin to use wire stringing guitars. And Martin is aware of this. And he has to design a different kind of bracing system. He didn't invent it, but he did revisions to it, the X bracing. And from there, we get the guitar that is known as the steel string dreadnought. And that's, when people say Martin nowadays, that's what you're 90% of the time referring to. You're not referring to this. Although the earliest known Martin is owned by a friend of mine here in the San Francisco Bay Area. And it's probably a year older than or younger than this. You're younger than this one. I like to think, I have this fanciful imagination for everything, but specifically that this guitar was finished by Martin. And because it corresponds to those years when he was in the shop. Back to Spain now, because that takes America off in a different direction. Torres begins to do these experiments, Antonio Torres, with the guitar, taking what was the classic Spanish guitar, slightly bigger than this, but not much. The one that I showed with the photograph of the 12 strings, that did have fan bracing already. And he expands that and makes the body bigger, deeper. But most importantly, he makes the top paper thin. The top on this guitar and my French guitar, they are thick tops. They're not thin. Torres begins to make guitars paper thin tops with beautiful ornamentation. And almost every one of them has inside of them a conical metal speaker called a tournevis. He made almost all of his guitars with a tournevis. That gives directionality and a greater sense of projection to the sound coming out of the guitar. I don't know why people don't do it now. Now we have portholes here on many guitars. There was an instrument that was in his shop when Francisco Tárrega was really becoming a more renowned guitarist. And he walks in there and Torres hears him play and he goes, no, that guitar isn't for you. I've got one in the back. And he comes out with an instrument that is widely, is referred to as called FE17. With Torres, there are two letters. You have FE meaning the first epoch and SE meaning second epoch. What divides them is the fact that Torres went into the grain business for a few years. He needed to make a better living.
Yeah.
He and Julian Arquez, who is a monster virtuoso, who taught Tárrega some lessons, went into the bread and flour and the grain business, and it was a disaster. And then they went back to doing their thing, being a virtuoso guitarist and being a guitar builder. Anyway, I had a copy of FE17 made for me by Michael Thames of Santa Fe, New Mexico, and it's a beautiful copy. And you'll be able to hear a couple of pieces played on that guitar. One of them is Capriccio Árabe by Francisco Tárrega, and the other one are two lovely pieces by Ángel Barrios, the Barrios no one knows. He was from Granada, Spain, born at the end of the 19th century, and wrote very folkloric Hispanic music that was reflective of Spanish culture. The two pieces, the name of the piece is called Arroyos de la Alhambra, meaning the creeks, the little running creeks that go through the Alhambra in Granada. And there's an invocación, an invocation, followed by a tonadilla, a dance. And it's beautiful music, and I think guitarists should really play it a lot. And with that, I'm done.
Thank you so much, Rich. That was amazing. I got a lot of, flashbacks and memories, a little bit triggering, just kidding, of the wonderful time I spent at the conservatory with you. So great to see you. And I hope that one day we have you down to San Diego to do the same thing.
You know, it's funny. I just got a call yesterday. I'm playing in Pomona, doing something at Pomona next February.
Oh, okay.
I'll let you know if I'm going to come down. And USC. So I'll let you know. There's actually a presenter that might want to do a co-sponsorship. They called me in San Diego.
Okay.
I've played for them a few times. I actually am playing in San Diego in January. I just remembered that. I got to write the date. I'll let you know.
Okay. Well, no one will ever accuse you of not being busy. I assure you that. And if anyone has a chance to study with Rich or reach out to him, I would encourage you to do so. So as you saw today, he's a wealth of information, and you can never spend enough time learning about these instruments and the historical impact that they have on all of music. And that's why I wanted you here today. And that's why I want to thank you as an artist for opening my eyes to the history of the instrument and how much it provided to music history.
And never put down your Stratocasters or Les Pauls. Keep them going.
Keep them going. Okay, you heard it from Rich here. So
keep them going. Great to see you, man. Thank you so much for letting me do this and run amok